Hello, Ali. Welcome to whatever this is, philosophical debate or exchange. And we're going to have a very quick session right now because I know you have to get to something else. But you are would psychotherapist be the correct term?
That is, yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And I notoriously am a philosopher, and particularly of the so-called analytic stripe. And as you and I were discussing just before I began to record this, um, analytic philosophers are very concerned about logic, and the essence of logic is not to contradict yourself. So we analytic philosophers are forever going around trying to detect the contradictions in other people's supposedly logical arguments, which are usually not logical. They make fallacious inferences right and left. We, philosophers, everybody make fallacious inferences right and left. And analytic philosophers are always striving to make arguments that are not fallacious and to help other people in the same way. But you, as a psychotherapist, made this, I thought, beautiful comment about how you are helping. Put it in your own words. You said you are helping people what to
Well,
what?
we have, yeah. So obviously, people will come with contradictions, and you'll get someone who loves a person and hates them at the same time. And we help people to live with their contradictions, not necessarily to solve them. Um, and I just thought that was an interesting comparison with the sort of idea of self-contradiction and that kind of thing. And also, like with analytic philosophy, I was just making the point that um, there's a completely different kind of philosophy, continental philosophy, that doesn't worry so much about contradiction. And in many ways, that's a criticism that's made against continental philosophy. But this idea, and I think this is like the main thing that, which I think was kind of interesting, was that the whole idea of not contradicting yourself is a normative notion. Um, and so obviously you'll want to do away with some of that, I assume.
Well, okay, but see, then again, it arose in our discussion that normativity is itself ambiguous, and deploying this concept or using this word can itself lead to ambiguity, equivocation, even contradiction, because in a field such as yours, which is based in psychology, which is presumably an empirical discipline, you're concerned about empirical norms, the way people actually are on average or in general. Whereas an analytic philosopher, such as myself, would be concerned typically with normativity in the sense of a supposedly objective standard according to which people ought to be a certain way or behave a certain way or think or feel a certain way. So normativity itself is being used in contradictory, very, at least we could say, very different ways. So I think you are spot on when you point out that the analytic philosophers may be after something which is really at odds with human nature. And so what I, as a philosopher, I think about this problem all the time. And I think, well, what is the point then of philosophy the way an analytic philosopher does it, if we're, as it were, trying to impose an ought, on people who don't live in accordance with ought, even in the case of morality, right? What
And
should do we just scrap morality because oughtness is just an absurd ideal for actual human beings?
and is it something that a lot of philosophers like don't realize they're doing? Um,
Right,
obviously,
right,
you seem to acknowledge that it's something that you're doing, but some philosophers will do without realizing that they're doing it.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's sort of like my personal or even professional campaign. All these books and articles I've been writing, promoting what I call amorality, and more recently I've been calling it. Here's a real technical term for you folks at home. Uh, aletheism, but for short, that could really be called aletheism, which is the idea that truth, or maybe more modestly, rationality itself, has to go by the board. Again, we might speak of a rationality. At least if we conceive of rationality and morality as things which are objective and are being imposed upon people contrary to the way people actually are. Now, if it were possible to come up with a conception of morality and or rationality, which somehow captured actual human norms, then maybe then we'd have something usable, all right? But again, that how could that be? Because actual human norms, especially in the field of, well, not especially, in either morality or rationality, they seem to be haywire, right? The average person lies at the drop of a hat. The average person contradicts him or herself or their self at the drop of a hat. So if we go by the actual norms of humanity, how can we possibly construct a useful morality or rationality from either of those? So what's left for us then?
And most error theorists, they would still hold on to rationality.
You mean in an objective sense?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
Mackey did. I think Joyce
Yes,
does.
of course. Yes. J.L. Mackey, who was very famous for debunking the objectivity of morality. And in fact, as he put it, all objective values, he said all objective values are fictitious. And I completely agree with that. However, I too kind of drew the line with rationality until it dawned on me that rationality is itself an objective value. And so if one is really, serious about rejecting the objectivity of all values, well, then rationality has to go by the board too. And in my latest book called Reason and Ethics, where I'm taking on morality and rationality, what do we do about this, right? I I think I come up with a solution. You know, that's not a book plug, of course. But I'll also
Look
say
away.
my book, Reason and Ethics, has also just come out in paperback and is actually affordable now. So, but that's not a book plug, of course. Oh, am I contradicting myself? So what?
There's something because I remember you saying I can't remember which book this is in, but I do remember you saying something like my position. I'm not justifying my position rationally. I think something like this. I'm to justify my position through kind of subjective reasons. I can't quite remember
Well, let me see if I
how you
can remember what I said, because I write so much, it's hard even for me to remember what I
remember.
said. But I
Yeah,
think what it boils down to is that I feel all values involve desire and not just beliefs. And that's the save. Well, that's part of the save. That's part of the save. Because then it turns out I'm not trying to justify in any sense. I'm just saying this is what I prefer. This is what I desire. I like rationality. I like it. I recognize that other people don't, or at least they claim not to. It is rather hard for me to imagine how a human being could get through life uh, in irrationally, So even if they explicitly deny any allegiance to rationality, I question whether that's really possible. And that's the other part of my save of rationality, because not only do I hold that it's a matter of subjective preference rather than an objective standard, but I also hold that concepts are retained because they're useful. not because they're true, because they're useful. And I don't know what could be more useful than rationality. So
Hmm.
that's my answer in a nutshell.
And then if I'm not, a lot of science still works this way. It's useful. It achieves certain results, or it helps to make certain predictions. It isn't necessarily um, objectively true.
Well,
Question of
yes, I
why?
mean that's a position within philosophy of science, and yes, some actual practicing scientists probably accept that view of the matter. Uh, and what's that called? Instrumentalism, I think, might be a technical term for that, where they say, well, our scientific theories are useful. They're instruments for, as you said, making predictions and so forth. But we're not really
Yeah,
uncovering the truth of the matter. We're not in the business of developing a metaphysics of the way the universe actually is. Yeah, that is one of the standard views in science as well, not just philosophy.
it may be like if someone was to accept the position that you're putting forward, they would have to like about morality. Obviously, like it's just as problematic for epistemic objectivity. So they almost come as a package, and I suppose also aesthetic values come in there as well. They're all part of the same package. They all come together. Uh, but like I said, I just think there are lots of people who would say no, morality is separate, and almost that because I know some anti-realists about morality, but who are perfectly happy with epistemic objectivity. So, and I think like definitely read your book for some guidance and like to see that they come as a pair really.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was originally an objection to my amorality that finally brought me to this even more extreme view of, a truth, which again, the technical term is analytheism. Uh, and then I gave a save. I saved them in a certain form. But I have an additional reason for still frowning upon the retention of moral vocabulary. I'm still comfortable with rational vocabulary, although I want to go lightly there as well, and ultimately I may move away from that as well. But especially moral vocabulary, because just, well, again, instrumentally, when you go around telling people they're doing something morally wrong or they're morally bad people, things like that, you're not going to win friends and you're not going to
Right.
persuade anybody of anything, right? You're just going to start arguments. They're just going to get more defensive, right? So it's just not useful to use this moral vocabulary, I feel. And especially since I think we have an alternative vocabulary that we can use just as well in terms of well, what do you want? What do you like after you've reflected upon matters sufficiently and have sufficient relevant experience and cite relevant evidence and so forth and so forth? I think we can talk perfectly well without using moral vocabulary and avoid getting into a lot of unnecessary fights.
Because I'm just thinking about as you're talking, I'm just thinking about a situation like flat. I don't know. You got a flat earther or something like that. Someone believes the Earth is flat. Kind of have to go after this one. But I just wondered how would you still use the same rational language to address them, or because in many ways it's still the same as it's still an argument or a disagreement that we'd have. It's not necessarily as heated as a moral argument, but it is in a sense an argument.
No, I completely agree with you, which is why, again, in my book, Reason and Ethics, I've gone all the way because yes, it struck me at a certain point, just as you've said now, that the same kind of unnecessary haggling you get into in moral disputes occurs surely in what would you call them, factual disputes. I mean, well, take things like the theory of evolution, right? You
Right.
know, people killing one another over practically, well, maybe even literally, about whether evolution is true. You know, let's get rid of the truth vocabulary, the rational vocabulary. Let's not say, oh, you people who don't believe in evolution are, you know, irrational or ignorant, or, you know, forget all that. I'll just tell you why I believe. See, this is the belief, there's desire, belief, right? These are psychological things which are real. These are
Mm.
real, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just tell you why I believe, I'll give you my reasons why I believe Darwinism makes perfect sense. You know, why I believe it, why I believe it. And you're perfectly free, if you don't believe in evolution, to tell me why you don't believe it, right? And you can try to poke holes in my reasons, and I can try to poke holes in your reason. But you know, at the end of the day, you're going to believe what you believe. I believe what I believe. We should, well, I don't want to say should. I want to live in a world where we continue to respect one another, right? We can be friends, we can be colleagues, whatever. We live in the same society, we get along, we had joint projects to do together, blah blah blah, you know. So that's it. Now I have to totally acknowledge that there will be some beliefs and also some desires where the differences cannot be reconciled, and the beliefs or desires are held so strongly that maybe you can't just go on being, you know, friends and everything, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Where
Right.
people, you might literally go to war. You might literally go to war, you know, all those things. Because, you know, if somebody just enjoys setting people on fire,
Right.
you know, well, I don't like that. I mean, I don't like that a lot. And I'll do whatever is necessary under the circumstances to stop them from just setting people on fire because they'll just like doing it, you know?
And what's funny about that is that people were take like, I don't know, Thomas Nagel writing a book about evolution where he criticizes it, and just the fury that people had against that book, and hatred for Tom Nagel, and you just think, you know, it's not like he's sort of sets somebody on fire, or like you just said. Like you can live in a world with some. I could live in a world with someone who's skeptical about evolution, right? It's not gonna. Yeah, so I agree with that. That's good.
Wow. I really thank you for this conversation. I think we have covered just about everything I ever wanted to know about my whole philosophy of life. So, Ollie, I hope we'll have another opportunity to discuss other things. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joel. Nice to talk to you, mate. See you.